My cousin Nate is in the Coast Guard, and he has been for over a decade. He's not the kind of guy to lie or make things up. He's one of the most straightforward people I know. Real grounded and not superstitious, not into horror, just a practical guy who likes boats and order. He told me this story in the summer of 2022. I asked him to repeat it more than once because of how messed up it was, and every time, the details stayed the same. This happened back in 2017, when he was assigned to a lighthouse off the coast of Maine on a 2-week maintenance rotation. The place was called Matinus Rock, and it's way out there. You can only get to it by boat or helicopter. It's nothing more than a jagged, rocky island with a single lighthouse and one auxiliary building that stores fuel and maintenance equipment. There's no power grid, no plumbing, and barely any cell signal. The lighthouse itself is automated, but it still requires occasional manual upkeep, which is why the Coast Guard sends people out to it every year or so. Usually it's a solo assignment, but there had been strange electrical failures the year before, so for this trip they decided to send 2 people, Nate and another guy named Russell. The first few days were fine, windy, boring, and repetitive. During the day, they check the beacon mechanics, test the emergency batteries, refill the diesel generator, and scrape off layers of salt corrosion from the metal interior. At night, they'd read, eat simple meals, and kill time playing cards. It was isolation, but it was expected. No red flags. Then, on the 4th night, Nate woke up around 2 in the morning feeling weird. Not sick, not in pain, just like something was wrong with the atmosphere. The air was heavier than usual, and he said it felt like standing in a room right before a thunderstorm, except the sky was clear and silent outside. He sat up and looked around. It was dark, and then he noticed something. There was no rotation from the beacon. The lighthouse was supposed to send out a sweeping light beam every few seconds, even during maintenance. It was a huge deal if the light failed. He got up and shook Russell awake, and the 2 of them made their way up the narrow spiral staircase to the top of the tower to see what was going on. When they got up there, they found the gears that rotated the beacon were still moving, but the actual light itself wasn't turning. Something was jammed in the mechanism. It was a large, dark piece of cloth, like a blanket or an old coat wedged deep into the gear assembly. The thing was soaked, covered in this slimy, mossy substance, and it smelled like rotting seaweed and mildew. They were both confused. The door had been locked, and the windows were sealed. No wind or birds. It didn't make sense, so they removed the fabric, tossed it outside into the wind, and went back to bed, thinking it was just some bizarre one-off incident. The next night, the exact same thing happened again. Around the same time, just after 2, Nate woke up and saw that the beacon wasn't turning. They went up and found another piece of cloth jammed into the same mechanism. Only this time, it wasn't the same type of fabric. It was smaller. Looked like an old-fashioned scarf or a shawl. It was red, frayed at the edges, and soaked through with what looked like ocean water. It even had tiny crustaceans clinging to it, like it had just come out of the sea. Nate said that was the moment things stopped feeling coincidental. They checked the doors, the windows, the supply closet, but everything was secure. Now they were starting to wonder if someone was messing with them, or worse, if something had gotten into the lighthouse and was deliberately trying to screw with the light. From that night on, they began blocking the stairwell with heavy crates after doing the final check upstairs. They locked the beacon room and the bottom entrance religiously, but on the 7th night, something happened that Nate still refuses to try to explain. He said he was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when he heard Russell whispering from across the room. But he wasn't talking to Nate. He was murmuring to the corner of the room, saying strange, disconnected things, like someone was standing there. Nate leaned up and asked what he was saying, and Russell blinked slowly and looked confused. He told Nate he wasn't saying anything, but later that night, Nate woke again and found Russell sitting at the window, staring down at the rocks below. When he asked what he was doing, Russell said he thought he saw someone standing down there on the rocks the night before, barely visible on the edge of the beacon light. He said it looked like someone was watching them, and then disappeared when the light rotated back. After that, things started spiraling. Russell got weirder every day. He stopped sleeping, stopped talking much, and just stared out the window for hours. Nate asked him if he was okay, and Russell would just mutter about noises in the wall or about hearing voices from inside the stairwell. On the 9th night, they both heard footsteps on the stairs. Not the usual creaking from the wind, but real, slow, deliberate footsteps, one after the other, coming down from the beacon room above. Nate looked over and saw Russell standing at the bottom of the stairs, frozen and staring up. He asked him if he'd gone up there, and Russell just looked at him and said no. Then he asked if Nate had. Neither of them had moved. They stood there listening, but the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. That night, they shoved a dresser in front of the bedroom door and slept with knives under their pillows. On the 11th night, they were woken up again by the beacon failing. This time, when they reached the top of the lighthouse, the beacon room door was wide open. Not just unlocked, not just cracked open, completely swung open like someone had kicked it in. The wind was howling through, and when they got inside, the beacon wasn't just stopped. It had been deliberately tampered with. The bulb was unscrewed and placed upright in the middle of the room. That thing is industrial grade. You can't just twist it off by hand without effort. Nate stared at it, terrified, while Russell just kept muttering that someone had done it. Then, Nate felt something brush against his back. Something cold. He spun around, but no one was there. Russell had gone pale. He just kept pointing at the wall, whispering that he saw a hand come out of the bricks. They ran back down the stairs and locked themselves in the bedroom. Nate didn't sleep at all. Russell started rocking back and forth in the corner, whispering to someone who wasn't there. The next morning, Nate used the emergency sat phone and called for an early pickup, saying there had been a serious mechanical failure. The boat showed up that afternoon, but here's the creepiest part. When they arrived, the crew asked them about the distress call they had made at 2:12 a.m. that morning, but Nate had never made any call. He didn't touch the phone until daylight. The deckhand said they'd received a garbled call that came through with static and a voice saying something about someone being there with them. Then it cut out. Russell didn't speak the entire ride back. He quit the Coast Guard a few months later and never told anyone what really happened out there. Nate still does maintenance duty sometimes, but he says he'll never ever go back to Matinus Rock.